The multilateral negotiations between representatives of the United States and Ukraine have concluded in Jeddah, attracting the attention of the international community. According to the final statement published after the meeting, Ukraine expressed its readiness to immediately implement a 30-day ceasefire along the line of contact. In turn, Washington confirmed its intention to resume military assistance to Kyiv, including arms deliveries and intelligence sharing. These steps could mark an important phase in the ongoing conflict. However, their implementation and consequences raise numerous questions among experts. Military analyst and former U.S. intelligence officer Scott Ritter provided a detailed commentary on the outcome of the negotiations. He noted that the battlefield situation over the past year has not been in Ukraine's favor. According to him, Russian forces have demonstrated significant superiority, delivering serious blows to the armed forces of Ukraine, AFU. Ritter particularly highlighted a recent operation involving airborne units near Zhuja, which, in his view, was highly successful. As a result, Russian forces not only reclaimed significant territories, but also advanced into border areas, marking an important strategic achievement. Ritter emphasized that the current situation is unfavorable for Russia if considering the proposals put forward by the US and the Ukrainian delegation. In his opinion, the Russian side is unlikely to agree to a ceasefire under conditions where military initiative is entirely in their hands. The analyst suggested that Moscow may insist on additional conditions that take its interests into account. Possible demands could include the lifting of international sanctions, recognition of control over 4 Ukrainian regions, or other political and economic concessions. Ritter also noted that Russia currently holds a significant advantage and can dictate its terms since all key cards are in its hands. He added that any ceasefire agreements would only make sense if they reflect the current realities and the interests of all parties involved. Otherwise, the negotiations may remain merely a formal step without leading to a long-term resolution. Thus, despite statements about readiness for a temporary ceasefire, the situation remains extremely tense, and the further development of events will depend on how well the parties can find a compromise that considers both the military and political aspects of the conflict. According to military analyst Scott Ritter, Donald Trump's current policy demonstrates that the United States has taken a clear course toward reclaiming its status as a truly great and influential nation. Trump has repeatedly stated his intention to act as a peacemaker in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has sparked interest and debate among experts. As Ritter notes, even before officially taking office, Trump had adopted a clear and well-thought-out position reflecting his pragmatic approach to international relations. Why support those who are clearly losing? According to Ritter, this question has become one of the key elements of Trump's strategy. Trump's history as a businessman and politician shows that he is not afraid to take risks and learn from his mistakes. He has lost his fortune several times, but always found a way to restore his position. Now, having become president for the second time, he has approached his role with even greater determination and experience. During his first term, his capabilities were limited, as the majority in Congress consisted of representatives of the so-called deep state, the political elite that has traditionally influenced U.S. domestic and foreign policy. These individuals largely dictated their own terms, preventing Trump from fully implementing his ideas. However, as Scott Ritter emphasizes, this time Trump has prepared in advance for potential obstacles. He has assembled a team of strong and loyal individuals who share his values and vision for the country's future. This has allowed him to act with greater confidence and consistency. In matters of resolving international conflicts, including the Russia-Ukraine issue, his team operates as a unified front, demonstrating cohesion and professionalism. As Ritter points out, These guys have everything under control, making them serious players on the political stage. One of Trump's first actions after taking office was a phone call to Vladimir Putin, not Volodymyr Zelensky. According to Scott Ritter, this gesture speaks volumes. In diplomatic terms, it signaled with whom he intends to engage in an equal dialogue and to whom he will dictate terms. Ritter believes that this approach reflects Trump's pragmatism and his desire to build relations with key global players based on real opportunities and U.S. interests. Thus, according to Scott Ritter, Trump's current policy is aimed at strengthening the U.S. as a great power capable of influencing global processes. His actions and statements indicate that he is ready to take decisive steps to achieve his goals, whether in conflict resolution or the protection of national interests. In this context, his approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict serves as yet another example of his strategic thinking and ability to operate in complex conditions. The rare earth resources deal currently being discussed is, in essence, a return on investment for the interested parties. When Zelensky arrived at the White House, he showed clear disrespect toward his hosts, and he was directly called out for it. This was yet another confirmation that Zelensky lacks the diplomatic culture and training that typically backs experienced politicians. Instead, he has extensive experience in comedy shows, which, to the surprise of many, he even displayed within the walls of the White House. Such behavior had been tolerated in Europe, where, as Ritter notes, most modern politicians are characterized by weakness and indecisiveness. This is no longer the Europe that was once known for strong and charismatic leaders capable of defending their interests on the international stage. As a result, Zelensky has easily manipulated and continues to manipulate European politicians, exploiting their willingness to compromise for his own benefit. However, this approach doesn't work with the United States. America, especially under the Trump administration, demands clarity, respect, and the fulfillment of obligations. Nevertheless, as a pragmatic politician, Trump needed a legitimate representative of Ukraine to sign the rare earth metals deal. This was an important step for further cooperation between the two countries. Additionally, elections had to be held and power officially transferred to a new Ukrainian leader who might be more agreeable and open to compromises. However, this is a long-term process requiring time and effort. Therefore, the parties decided to proceed based on the current situation and work with what they had at the moment. Zelensky was essentially pressured into submission, and the deal was signed on terms favorable to the United States. While there is no official document confirming all the details of the agreement, statements have already been made suggesting that the conditions originally proposed by the Ukrainian side were not taken into account. This indicates that the negotiations were conducted in a tough manner, with U.S. interests dominating. Now the next move belongs to Russia. How Moscow will respond to this deal and what steps it will take in return remain open questions. The situation surrounding rare earth resources continues to be tense, and the future course of events will depend on how the parties manage to balance their interests with international obligations. According to military analyst Scott Ritter, Putin could be drawn into a trap through this agreement with the European Union. In his view, if a ceasefire agreement is signed, certain conditions will be established that can be easily violated, potentially even without Russia's direct involvement. This creates risks for Moscow, as any provocation, even if not initiated by the Russian side, could be used against it. Imagine for a moment that after signing a temporary truce, an incident occurs, regardless of who is responsible. In such a scenario, European leaders would have a free hand. They could immediately blame Russia and justify continuing to arm Ukraine with even greater intensity, without concern for internal protests or public opinion. Scott Ritter also highlights that European countries have already allocated enormous sums to support Ukraine. For example, a recent announcement confirmed the allocation of €800 billion for rearmament. This is a massive amount of money that could fundamentally shift the balance of power in the region. However, as Ritter notes, such decisions often conceal selfish interests. Through grants, military aid, and arms supply contracts, it is easy to profit, and many European leaders seem to be taking full advantage of this opportunity. Public support for these leaders within their own countries hovers around 20%, indicating a deep crisis of trust among the population. They show little concern for domestic issues, rising prices, social problems, or public dissatisfaction. Their primary focus is on filling their own pockets by exploiting the current geopolitical situation. Thus, signing a ceasefire agreement may not lead to peace, but rather serve as a tool for further pressure on Russia and increased military support for Ukraine. Under these circumstances, Russia must act with extreme caution to avoid falling into a pre-planned trap. Any agreement must be thoroughly analyzed, and its terms must be clearly defined to eliminate the possibility of manipulations by European partners. Otherwise, a temporary truce could escalate into a new wave of tensions and an even greater intensification of the armed conflict. However, Putin is intelligent and experienced enough to avoid such a trap. Over his years in power, he has accumulated vast political experience that surpasses that of many European leaders combined. In Europe, political leaders frequently change, and their priorities often revolve around extracting personal benefits from their positions as quickly as possible while the opportunity lasts. This creates a situation where long-term national interests take a back seat to short-term personal gains. Ritter also points out that Donald Trump has repeatedly shown respect for Vladimir Putin. To Trump, Putin is a leader who genuinely cares about his country and its citizens. In this regard, they share similarities, which is why Trump is unlikely to allow a scenario in which Russia is placed in a losing position. However, as Ritter emphasizes, the situation in Europe is complicated by the fact that real power often does not belong to national leaders, but rather to the so-called deep state, a network of bureaucrats and elites that operates in its own interests, which do not always align with those of individual nations. Nevertheless, there are independent countries in Europe that strive to conduct their own policies despite pressure from larger powers. These are typically smaller but courageous nations, such as Hungary, Serbia, and Slovakia. They seek to defend their national interests and are not always willing to blindly follow directives from Brussels or Washington. Their stance, according to Ritter, deserves respect, as it demonstrates that even in an era of dominance by major powers, it is possible to maintain sovereignty and pursue policies aimed at the well-being of one's own people. Thus, although there are threats and traps set by European leaders and the deep state, Russia has every chance to avoid them thanks to Vladimir Putin's experience and strategic thinking. Moreover, support from countries like Hungary, Serbia, and Slovakia could play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of power on the international stage. As Scott Ritter concludes, in the current situation, it is essential to remain vigilant and continue acting in the national interest without falling for provocations and manipulations. Now, imagine this scene. Vladimir Putin, in the Kursk region, sitting in military uniform, declares that it is necessary to seriously consider creating a buffer zone in the Kursk direction. At that moment, according to military analyst Scott Ritter, the opposing side must have felt uneasy. If Putin is saying this openly, it means the buffer zone will be created. It's only a matter of time. Such statements are not mere words. They are a clear signal of intent, backed by real capabilities and resources. The establishment of a buffer zone could be an important step in stabilizing the region. It would not only strengthen Russia's defensive positions, but also reduce the risk of new provocations from the enemy. However, as the analyst points out, such actions will inevitably provoke a response from the West, which might attempt to use this as a pretext for further pressure on Russia. Overall, as Ritter admits, he, like many others, is eagerly awaiting the end of this conflict. I believe many of you share this sentiment. War is always a tragedy, bringing suffering to people, destroying economies, and exacerbating international tensions. However, peace must not come at any cost. It must be one that ensures the conflict does not reignite with even greater force. There are forces interested in prolonging the conflict. These are the so-called deep state elites, who profit from military supplies and geopolitical maneuvers. However, according to the analyst, neither Trump nor Putin will allow these forces to achieve their goals. Despite their differences in approach, both leaders understand that long-term stability can only be achieved through dialogue and mutual respect for interests. Thus, while the path to peace may be long and difficult, it is crucial for all sides to continue seeking compromises and resist provocations. As Scott Ritter concludes, only in this way can a sustainable resolution be reached, one that brings peace not only to Ukraine and Russia, but to the entire region as well.